Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads, last show of 2022. Thank you for being with us. Good to see familiar faces and names streaming into the webinar there. Episode 131 times we've done this, hard to believe. December 16th, we hope you have a wonderful holiday coming up. Whatever you're celebrating, we just hope you have a wonderful time in these coming weeks. We're going to be off at Into Being in between Christmas and New Year's, and we're looking forward to that time with family and friends. So today we've got a great show. Upcoming events, then FDA news. We've got 2 items on that, and then the McCarthy interview from Microsoft. She joined us at the MedHealth Summit on November 1st for a sit-down interview, and you're going to see that today. On the news today, we're going to give you a refresher on CDRH Learn. The new risk modules are in there, and I just have to remind you, this is an amazing, amazing resource if you are at all in this industry. I guess you are, because you wouldn't be watching the show if you weren't. You have to know about CDRH Learn. We'll be telling you about that. And then I'm going to do a live test drive of the Digital Health Policy Navigator from FDA. A lot of you have had questions about, is my digital health product a medical device? What kind of enforcement is it going to get from FDA? I was just talking with any number of you recently about that. And now we have it live, able to go through the Digital Health Policy Navigator from FDA. It's a 7-step process that we'll be walking through. You'll want to go through it on your own with your own product in mind, but I'll tell you, it's going to be really informative here. First of all, some upcoming events. Things are winding down for 2022, obviously, but only starting to ramp up for 2023. And on January 16th of next year, applications are due for the COVID-19 and Health Equity Innovation Awards. If I recall correctly, FDA is awarding $2 million to 4 applications, and those are due by January 16th. If you think that some innovation that you're working on has to do with health equity, that is, among other things like racial or demographic disparities, especially as it relates to things like COVID-19, you might want to take a look at this. So if your innovation helps to address that kind of a thing, take a look, scan the QR code. And January 23rd and 24th, the Social Determinants of Health Summit at the Marriott Marquis San Diego Marina in San Diego, California. Scan the QR code to get connected. And on January 31st, Diane Bowie was on the show a few weeks ago, and MedTech Innovator, the company that she works for now, their accelerator, they are opening their applications, or their applications, I should say, are open. The deadline to apply is January 31st. They are one of the biggest MedTech accelerators out there, and they would love to hear from you. You can apply through that QR code right there. Then in January and February, our friends over at Fast Forward Medical Innovation and the University of Michigan Medical School are running Biomedical Innovation 101. They're talking about research commercialization in the realms of drug discovery, diagnostics, digital health, biomedical device development, and all those sessions are going to be live and available on the dates that you see there. Scan the QR code for more information. Our own Adrian Harris will be part of the February 15th session. And then looking all the way to the end of 2023, November 14th through 16th, the Combination Product Summit is coming back to Columbus, Ohio. And on October 8th through 10th, the Eye and the Chip is coming to the Southfield Westin Hotel. You can go to henryford.com/the Eye and the Chip to get connected to that. We had Dr. Hesberg on the show a few weeks ago, and what an amazing nexus of technologies and clinical needs. All right, it's time for a little bit of news today. Just 2 items, and one we're going to spend a little more time on, one a little less. The first one, how do I? A refresher on CDRH Learn and new risk modules. Scan the QR code there to find CDRH Learn in all of its glory. Every time I go back to this site, there is more than there was before. They're always adding modules. If you don't know about this and you're not spending some time there, I mean, hey, at Into Being, we love to tell you all about these things, but you can take a lot of it from the horse's mouth. Videos, presentations, transcripts, it's all there. Some nice walkthroughs of a lot of the content that you need to know from FDA. And in specifics today, 2 new additions as of yesterday: Risk Basics for medical devices and Application of Risk Management Principles for medical devices. These 2, if you've heard us talk, these are so important. And if you want to hear about 14971 from FDA's perspective, have a look at those 2 links. I'm going to take you to just 3 slides out of that second presentation. And this is 3 tables where FDA describes their use of benefit risk analysis all throughout the regulatory cycle. So in the columns, we have PMAs and de novos, 510Ks, investigational device exemption determinations, and then post-market availability, compliance, and enforcement decisions. And what FDA is saying here is that the benefit factor considered, be it the type of benefit, the magnitude of the benefit, the probability or likelihood of experiencing one or more of the benefits, and the duration of effects, are generally considered during the review of PMAs, 510Ks, IDEs, and post-market use. With one exception, the type of benefit is not considered during a 510K substantial equivalence determination. Post-market, there's more benefit risk thinking that comes to play. Should we keep a device on the market if there's some other reason to maybe take it off? Compliance, enforcement decisions. The patient perspective on the benefit can be evaluated once a device has been on the market. Benefit factors for healthcare professionals or caregivers can be evaluated if the device has been on the market. And the medical necessity can be evaluated. So benefit risk is part of the whole product development life cycle, or I should say the product life cycle. But in addition, there's more that can be considered once the device is on the market. Now, what about risks? We just talked about benefits. How does FDA think about risks? Well, again, PMAs, 510Ks, IDEs, and then post-market. In the case of the severity, FDA considers the severity of a likely risk or harm across all of these categories. The probability or likelihood of risks or harmful events happening, so the first was severity, this is now the probability or likelihood. They think about that all across these. Now they say that only in the case of 510Ks do they think about the probability of the patient experiencing a harmful event. Now that's an interesting statement, one that's probably elaborated more in the presentation. The distribution of non-conforming devices is a post-market consideration. And things like the duration of harmful events is considered in all the categories. Now this slide's a little bit more sparse, but false positive or false negative results, the presence of those, is considered in everything except for an IDE. Of course, for an investigational device exemption, the whole focus is that you're testing the device. So we're trying to figure out what the incidence of false positives and false negatives is. We're not so much focused on a long-term treatment. The patient tolerance of risk, the risk factors for healthcare professionals or caregivers, just like the benefit, can be considered post-market. And things like risk management and residual risk are considered in IDE determination. So for all this and more, you can go to that website, CDRH Learn, drill your way down to these 2 new presentations. Again, we've covered risk and benefit risk so much on the show. We love to talk about it at Into Being. But if you're in this industry and you haven't seen CDRH Learn, especially these modules on risk management and risk basics, go ahead and have a look there at CDRH Learn. Well, next up, I want to tell you about the Digital Health Policy Navigator. And whether you know it or not, this is something that many of you have been asking for because there's so many devices now that are connected or that are digital only. Digital health is such an important focus. And as I've been really pleased to see over the last year, the discussion has broadened beyond just what is this device or what is this drug or what is this biologic, to questions like population health. How are parts of our population doing? Do they need that device? Does that device work on that part of that population? And with this trend towards more digital tools and more devices that are on the web, in the cloud, delivered in all sorts of ways that aren't physical, it's hard to know, what is this? Who's regulating it? What do I have to do? And in fact, along that development cycle, we've had questions like, well, right now this is going to help in this kind of a trial, but we don't have that vision long term. Well, I think the FDA has heard some of those kind of concerns, and they've come up with the Digital Health Policy Navigator, which is a step-by-step, 7-step tool to answer a lot of these questions. Scan the QR code there if you'd like to go to this webpage and follow along. We're going to do this live on the FDA website. We're going to click here, start the Digital Health Policy Navigator. I wish every regulatory question could have such a nice process here to go through. We're going to click Start the Digital Health Policy Navigator. Step 1, is the software function intended for a medical purpose? And we've got yes, no boxes down here. Is the software function intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in humans? Those of you who are deep into this industry will recognize that that comes directly from the definition of what a medical device is. And as we've heard many times, some people will say, oh, my device doesn't actually diagnose, it just helps the clinician in their process of diagnosis, but my device doesn't diagnose. So I'm going to answer no. Well, unfortunately, that's missing the point that FDA is trying to make here. In fact, the question is it intended for use in the diagnosis, not does it perform the diagnosis? For example, if I were going to get a heart rate monitor, well, are heart rate monitors only used for diagnosing things? No, they're also used for sports purposes. There's no diagnosis going on at all. So if I had a heart rate monitor that was only used for going out there and getting better sports times, well, we might be able to say no to this. But if it's going to be an adjunct of some sort that's going to help participate in the diagnosis or treatment of a disease state or condition, we're going to have to answer yes. If we answered no, the good news would be that we're likely not a device and we can pretty much exit the system right there. But if the answer is yes, your product may be a device, go to step 2. Let's follow that. Step 2. Is the software function intended for administrative support of a healthcare facility? Now, it's good news if you can answer yes, because it's likely not a device. They state such things as processing and maintenance of financial records, claims or billing information, appointment schedules, business analytics, information about patient populations, admissions, practice and inventory management, and the list goes on. But the good news here is that if you're just writing software to manage hospital workflow and you don't enter into that diagnosis and treatment loop, you're just scheduling people and information without diagnostic or treatment specificity, you may be able to exit the system right here. But if the answer is no, we're going to go on to question 2B. For question 2B, is the software function intended for administrative support of laboratories, or for transferring, storing, converting formats, or displaying clinical laboratory test data and results? Now, that is using patient data, but it's not really in that patient-doctor loop. So if this is what it does, it's likely not a device and you can exit the system. But if no, your product may be a device. We'll go to step 3. Is the software function intended for maintaining or encouraging a healthy lifestyle and is unrelated to the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, prevention, or treatment of a disease or condition? Well, this one gets a little bit tricky. Let's talk about this. If we say, yes, it's intended for maintaining or encouraging a healthy lifestyle, well, then it's likely not a device. But here's where it gets tricky. What's the difference between prevention of a disease and maintaining or encouraging a healthy lifestyle? That gets a little bit more nuanced. Because it remains, if you say to a perfectly healthy person, this will help you maintain a healthy lifestyle, and there's no claims being made. Well, what if I go to a population, for example, of diabetics who haven't reached a really dramatic problem state yet, but they are diabetic, and I say this is going to help you maintain a healthy lifestyle by reducing your risks? Well, now we've entered that diagnosis or treatment of a disease state or condition. We're saying that we're going to make life better for a specific disease state. So this is one where we might want to answer no and continue to question 3B, where it asks, does the software function have an intended use that relates to the role of a healthy lifestyle with helping to reduce the risk or impact of certain chronic diseases or conditions? So maybe that diabetic that we mentioned, we want to reduce the impact of their certain chronic disease or condition. And while we might think that we're digging ourselves into a hole by answering yes to this, the actual end of this chain at the bottom of question 3, step 3, is actually pretty encouraging for a lot of companies out there. So if we say yes, we're going to question 3C. If we say no, we're going to step 4. If we're not just talking about healthy lifestyle, but we are sorry, it is complicated, folks. If we're on 3A and we say no, that we are encouraging a healthy lifestyle, but we are related to the diagnosis or cure of a disease state or condition, we are going to step 4. We're moving on there. But in 3B, if we can say that we are reducing the risk or impact of a certain chronic disease or condition, we're going to keep moving down this chain. If we say no to that, we're going to step 4. And then it asks this, is the relation between healthy lifestyle and disease specifically expressed as may help to reduce the risk of or may help living well with? If we answer yes to that, those are kind of magic words, because you may think we were digging ourselves into a hole. Oh no, we're treating something, we're diagnosing something, we're going to have to make our way down to the bottom of the pit here. There's actually some good news in 3.D. It's not the greatest news if you have to say no to that, if you don't use those magic words, because you're going on to step 4 and you may well be a device. But if the software function is low risk, if it's not low risk, we're going on to step 4. But if it is low risk, what about this, folks? Likely FDA intends to exercise enforcement discretion. If it's not invasive, it's not implanted, and it doesn't involve a technology that may pose a risk to the safety of users or other persons, it's generally considered low risk. So this is actually really, really good news for many of you. You've got a software function. That software function is intended for maintaining a healthy lifestyle, and you're not trying to treat a specific disease state or condition. Well, that's great news. But if you are kind of related to a specific disease state or condition, and you can make your way through this, if you can say that it reduces the risk or impact of chronic conditions, certain chronic conditions, if you can say that it uses this language, may help to reduce the risk of or may help living well with, it's good news. And then you get all the way to 3D. If you can say that the software function is low risk, which they define as, among other things, not involving risks from lasers or radiation exposure, then FDA likely intends to exercise enforcement discretion. And what that means is that although it should be regulated, although it probably counts as a device, FDA is saying that their intention is to let it through, effectively to turn a blind eye to that technology and to that product. So great news there in step 3 for many of you, even if you are working on a disease state or condition. Now let's go to step 4. Let's assume that we didn't make our exit here and find that wonderful news. There are still a few tidbits of good news on steps 4 through 7. 4A is the software function intended to serve as an electronic patient record or to transfer, store, convert formats, or display electronic patient records that are the equivalent of a paper medical chart. If it is, we'll keep going. If it's not, it may be a device. Is the software function intended for interpretation or analysis of patient records, including medical image data, for the purposes of diagnosis, cure, mitigation, prevention, or treatment? Well, it may be a device if that's the case. If we're doing interpretation and analysis, we pretty quickly get into the device category. But if no, we get to continue. In 4C, are the function records created, stored, or transferred or reviewed by healthcare professionals or by individuals under their supervision? If the answer is yes, we keep going. If the answer is no, if the healthcare professional, check this out, if the healthcare professional isn't going to be transferred to, is not going to be reviewed, is not going to review these records, then it is likely not a device. If they are going to review it, if this is going to affect them, we keep going. Are the software function records certified under a program of voluntary certification kept by the Office of the National Coordinator? If they are, it's likely not a device. But if they're not, it's another category where FDA intends to exercise enforcement discretion. Let's follow that chain one more time. If the software is not intended to serve, if it is intended to serve as electronic patient records, or it's intended to transfer, store, or convert formats or display patient records, that's good news. If it's not intended for interpretation or analysis of patient records, that's good news. And if the software function records are reviewed by healthcare professionals, it's ironically good news, as is if it's not, because in either case, this is a category where FDA intends to exercise enforcement discretion. Effectively, we're in the medical records space at this point, and those have been and continue to be exempt from FDA oversight in these ways. But what if we didn't get that good news right here? What if we're going on to step 5? Well, here's step 5. Is the software function solely intended? The idea here is being a conduit. If the software is really just a conduit of information, it's not affecting the information, if it's not making decisions, then we actually have a nice path out of this system. Is it solely intended to transfer, store, convert formats, or display medical device data and results, including medical images, waveforms, signals, or other clinical information? We keep going if yes. If not, it's probably a device. We'll go to step 6. But if it is solely intended to transfer, store, or convert, the next question, does the software function control or alter the functions of parameters of any connected medical device? If the answer is yes, obviously this may be a device. If we're changing the outcomes for medical devices, we're probably a device. But if the answer is no, we get to go to question 5C. which asks this: does the software function generate alarms or alerts or prioritize patient-related information on multi-patient displays? Is this something that's going to affect how this is visualized? If the answer is yes, it's probably a device. But if the answer is no, we keep going. Does it analyze or interpret medical device data? If the answer is yes, it's a device. But if the answer is no, it's likely not a device. Here's the best case path through step 5. Is it solely intended to transfer, store, or convert formats? And the answer is yes. Then, does it control or alter the functions or parameters of any connected medical device? And the answer is no. Does it generate alarms or alerts or prioritize things, which would be a medical decision? The answer should be no if we want to get out of this loop. And if it doesn't analyze or interpret medical device data, then we're in a really good place where it's likely not a device. Of course, if we've had to answer otherwise and have to go to step 6, this is where we find ourselves. Is the software function intended to acquire, process, or analyze a medical image, or a signal from an IVD, or a pattern or signal from a signal acquisition system? If the answer is yes, it's probably a device. We're moving on to the last step. But if no, we get to move forward. Does the software function display, analyze, or print medical information normally communicated between healthcare professionals? The answer yes is actually the preferable of those two answers from a regulatory standpoint. But if no, we have to go to step 7. Now, why would 6B answering yes, does the software function display, analyze, or print medical information normally communicated between healthcare professionals, be a lower burden route? See, what FDA is trying to do is to exempt conduits. While it's true that a communication system intended to simply pass information could be considered a medical device, the reality is that with digital technology being what it is, things that just think faster, this is not their intention to exercise enforcement. And so, the key here is normally communicated between healthcare professionals. Does the software function provide recommendations to a healthcare professional rather than providing a specific output or directive? Interestingly enough, yes could be a lower burden answer. And of course, no if the device provides a specific output or directive. That's going to push you to step 7. So if you tell the healthcare practitioner, here's what it is and here's what you need to do, that's a higher burden than saying, here's some information and some options. Now, why would those two things not be identically the same? Because what does your doctor do after they come and examine you? Every now and then they'll go back, they'll consult. If they're a good doctor, they might even look up some research. They might even look in some documents or other manuals to see, what should I do about this patient? If all the software is doing is quickly indexing and providing those normal resources to the doctor so that they can review them and make the same kind of decision that they would have otherwise, this is something that FDA is intending to exempt. Maybe you're doing a faster job than a doctor can do by going to a book. But nevertheless, all you're doing is automating that. You're not entering that decision process in any meaningful way. And if we've made it all the way to 6D, does the software function provide the basis of the recommendations so that the healthcare professional does not rely primarily on the recommendations to make a decision regarding the individual patient? In other words, are you providing them all the stuff so that they can make the decision, giving them the A-B options, and they make the decision? Well, if that's the case, it's likely not a device. It's just some kind of a reference material. But if the answer is no, that's when we're going on to step 7. But before we go there, let's just review one more time. If we're able to say that it doesn't acquire, process, or analyze medical images or signals from IVDs or from signal acquisition systems. And we're able to say that it just provides information that's normally communicated. And we're able to say it's providing information and options, not specific directives. And we're able to say that it provides the basis of those recommendations, then this is likely not a device, and it's some form of a reference material that's just highly automated and well indexed and suitable for use in that case. But if this is not the case, we get to step 7, the final step in the process. And step 7A starts with this. Does the software function provide or facilitate supplemental clinical care by coaching or prompting to help patients manage their health in their daily environment without providing specific treatment or treatment suggestions? Are these reminders? Is this coaching just a way to help the patient along to do what has already been decided? FDA intends to exercise enforcement discretion. It's the only news that's almost as good as that's not a medical device. But this is a place where even though it would count as a medical device, FDA is saying we want people to be able to coach through apps without making new decisions, providing new treatment ideas. And so that's some really, really good news. Obviously, if the answer is no, your product may be a device. Get ready for the full regulatory burden. But good news if you can answer yes to that. Does the software function help patients communicate with healthcare professionals by supplementing or augmenting the data or information, by capturing an image for patients to convey to their healthcare professionals about potential medical conditions? Wow, this is some good news, folks. In other words, if you have an app and you're able to take a picture of yourself and you're able to send that to your doctor, hey, why shouldn't that camera on that phone be considered a medical device? And the answer is it should be considered a medical device, but FDA intends to exercise enforcement discretion. Now, why enforcement discretion? Why not change the legislation? Well, because it's exactly that. It requires changing legislation to get this out of the system. And it may be that the FDA wants to monitor this and know how this is going to play out. But nevertheless, good news that this would be an enforcement discretion endpoint. Does the software function perform simple calculations? Here's the key: routinely used in clinical practice. If the answer is yes, then the FDA intends likely to exercise enforcement discretion. In other words, the things that are done routinely, if we automate them like references and like calculations, FDA is coming out very, very clearly that they intend for this to be something that is the basis for enforcement discretion, meaning you can go do it without it really, let's say, counting as a medical device. Of course, in truth, it is, but they're saying we're not going to make you jump through all those hoops. But if the answer is no, it's subject to FDA oversight. 7D, is the software function an extension of one or more medical devices by connecting the devices for purposes of control or analyzing medical device data? Again, in this case, likely the focus of FDA's regulatory oversight. Of course, if you're connecting for the purposes of control or analysis, you're entering into that diagnosis or treatment of a disease state or condition fully. You're not going to get away from FDA's regulatory oversight. And even though you answered no, wow, this is kind of a mean one, FDA. Even though you answered no to question 7D, based on your answers to the previous questions, your software function is likely a device. That is the focus of FDA's regulatory oversight. Go to question 7E. So at this point, we're down to answers, all of which leave us with regulatory oversight in all of these latter cases. So the answers to 7E and 7F are interesting, having to do with they transform a mobile platform into a regulated medical device? Does it perform patient-specific analysis and provide specific outputs? But either way, by this point in the chain, if you've made it all this way, you're pretty much a medical device subject to FDA's oversight. But we thought overall, this is a wonderful tool if you're engaged in anything having to do with digital health. Just an amazing thing. You should be on this website. You should be going through it. You should be doing that this weekend. Do it before the holiday, because the questions are all in there. The answers are all in there. If you need help with this, feel free to reach out to Into Being or anybody who works in this space, because there will be questions that come up that need some more nuanced thinking. But if you haven't looked at this in your digital health, you're behind the eight ball. So take a look at the Digital Health Policy Navigator. Scan that QR code right there. If there's any questions online, we're happy to take any of those now. A couple here. Recording of the session. Yeah, the recording is available right after this live on YouTube. We will also, as always, chop up each episode into the different sections. So if you don't want to have to listen to me blather on about CDRH Learn, you can also get to just, for example, the Digital Health Policy Navigator section. And if you scan that QR code right there with your phone, you can get to it. What I'll also do right here in the chat for those who are live in the webinar, I will just post, excuse me, I will just post the Digital Health Policy Navigator website to the chat for those who are on the Zoom webinar. Give me just 1 second while we do that. Oh, we having an audio problem there with in the studio? Oh, okay. So we got a little. Are you able to hear his audio? Our friend Ken Spencer had either a comment or a question, and it doesn't sound like we're going to be able to patch him through to me, but it sounds like Steve's going to be able to relay it. So, Ken, apologies for that.
Yeah, so two questions, Gene. Is there a separate navigator for software in a medical device as opposed to software as a medical device? That's question one. And then two, on your step 4, I mean, it's very interesting that electronic medical records are, not part of FDA oversight. And I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, great comment there, Ken, on the records, because obviously they're trying to clarify. If I understood your comment through Steve correctly, they're trying to clarify that the things that they have exempted, they're continuing to exempt. I know it's a frustration to a lot of people that electronic medical records are exempted, because sometimes they flirt with that device line, but at least FDA is coming out very clearly and stating these things. Now, to your question about embedded functions, I think that's a great thing. Let's go back to the Digital Health Center of Excellence here, and we'll go to the interactive overview. In this case, they're talking about the software product. What I don't think we have a lot of clarity for this is obviously they're focused on digital health. So their focus of this are the device functions, if we look here, that meet the definition of a device. I think here's the issue. If you have an embedded software system in a device, we're not so concerned with the software at that point, because the software isn't going to somehow magically make it not a medical device. So for example, if we have a stethoscope that happens to connect to your EMR, the device part of that, the hardware device part of that, is what makes it a medical device. And that's going to be what gets you the regulatory oversight. The fact that it connects to your EMR and just dumps some data in a way that is just acting as a conduit, well, okay, so that may not increase the regulatory burden, But that element that could have been, shall we say, excusable, that's not going to get you out of the stethoscope having been a medical device. So it's a great question, and if I understood it correctly, if I didn't understand it correctly, please please relay another question. But the focus here on digital health software only devices, software as a medical device, not so much software in a medical device, because if it's SIMD, it's already a medical device. The hardware makes that so. The software can't do anything to pull it back. But SAMD is the place where we have some opportunity for these exemptions. And it's pretty cool that they're being clear in it. So I hope I caught that right, Ken. If not, please come on back with a hand raised or whatever else we can do to help.
No, I think that's clarifying. One of the questions I have about SIMD stuff, though, is that software never changes, or it's always changing. Maybe a better way to put that. And so, if your device is cleared, then if you update the software, I mean, I think you have to go through a whole new validation process. If I'm not, but I may be mistaken on that. So, SIMD
Yeah,
is
that's a great question. Did we get to the end of the question there?
yes.
Great, and sorry for the audio troubles. Appreciate the questions, but with either we could be talking about AIML products, SAMD. We could be talking about SIMD, but in all of these cases, FDA, driven by the AIML, artificial intelligence and machine learning world, is really, really big this year, as we were telling you last week, on predetermined change control plans. So predetermined change control plans are really the hot topic at FDA. It's not clear how much they affect changes to existing medical devices. If it was frozen and now it needs to unfreeze and change, you're probably going to be going through, for example, the 510K checklist at that point, or the flowchart. But certainly for AIML models where it's going to change, predetermined change control plans are the topic du jour. And we could see this passing over. Like if in the future you're able to create a predetermined change control plan for a medical device that you might want to change in the future, while it's not a topic yet or something that's commonly done, it's certainly something that I think would become, this is just my opinion, would become more of a possibility in the future based on AIML. Looks like we've got another hand raised there. Okay, I think we still see a hand up from Ken there, but if did we get the questions answered?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thanks for those. Appreciate it very much. Sorry for the audio problems, but hope we got all those clarified. Great. Well, thank you for the interface today from everybody. All the questions, that was great. I hope you enjoyed this, and I think for those of you who are in SIMD, SAMD, and those who are trying to guide people in the process of understanding what on earth do I have to do for a medical device. I know it's part and parcel of our business, and we sit down with people in a room and we say, okay, where are you? And we bring this kind of information to bear. None of us want to have to do that on a daily basis. We want to do the work associated with that. So how do you make these kind of ideas front and center, easier to digest, easy for people to walk through themselves so that their questions are more informed so that we can hit more impactful things with them? These kinds of walkthroughs, click this, yes, no, click this, yes, no. If they're clear, are really, really great to have. So we wanted to highlight this from FDA. It's a great tool. Hope you'll make use of it in your business. And that was Digital Health Policy Navigator. Next up, in partnership with MedHealth on November 1st, we had the privilege of interviewing quite a few people who were the presenters at the MedHealth Summit at Ford Field in Detroit. Today, the last show of the year, we're bringing you the last interview that we performed on November 1st, and this was one I was most excited about. Molly McCarthy, the U.S. industry leader for health providers and plans from Microsoft, sat down with me for about 15 minutes to talk all about Microsoft's interest in all these questions of population health, demographics, digital health, the intersection of all these things, which I think 2022 is really the year where we've become fully cognizant how many of the challenges we face are bigger than the specific thing that we're working on, which is one of the reasons we're passionate about communicating and educating and connecting people, because it's only through these emergent systems where different things and different people are talking together that we're actually going to be able to solve the healthcare challenges that we have today and tomorrow. So enjoy this interview with Molly McCarthy from Microsoft. I'll be back at the end as we say goodbye. Good afternoon. I'm Gene Paranek, host of MedTech Crossroads. We are here at the MedHealth Summit at Ford Field in Detroit, Michigan, and I'm joined today by Molly McCarthy, who is the U.S. industry leader for health providers and plans with Microsoft. And you were good enough to come out here and talk at the summit. Your panel, charting a new patient experience through innovative bedside care. We're just grateful to have you here today at the event and talking to us right now.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I have a passion for the health and tech world, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, I can tell. I was looking at your CV or whatever you call these things, and looking back, and way back in the day, a neonatal intensive care nurse and pediatric nurse.
Yeah.
This is where you got your start.
I started a long time ago in neonatal intensive care, NICU, and pediatrics. So always, even back then, really had that patient-centric, family-centric approach to care because you had to. It wasn't just the baby or the child that you were caring for. It was really the entire family. And that's where I started my career. And just, to be honest, had a real curiosity with technology, and many years later, here I am.
It's really neat, Molly, because I looked one line up from there,
right,
and I realized, and then the next thing you were doing right after that was you were teaching other people. So you've got this sense of a vision of, I know what's needed, and now I want to communicate it. I want to see that plan come out, which, my goodness, now I look at what you're doing today with Microsoft and health providers and plans. You're thinking about how this should all go together.
Yeah, no, I worked clinically, and I also taught undergrads, and I still do. I lecture today.
Oh, cool.
It's just important for me that they have exposure to what's out there beyond maybe what they're learning in the classroom. And my passion's really been around thinking about how technology can really unite clinicians and patients so that they can better patient outcomes. And I'm going to talk about the quintuple aim, which started as the triple aim, which was better health outcomes, better patient experience, and lower cost of care. And it's morphed. It's added two other areas. One is, especially today, so important, the clinician experience, thinking about healthcare workforce burnout. And then the fifth really kind of goes across all the different facets of healthcare. It's just health equity. And that was really brought to, I would say, the public's attention through COVID-19. But really, it's always been a component of healthcare that we really need to think about, not just what happens in the hospital, but truly what happens and what is available to the community in terms of, just even Wi-Fi access, thinking about their community, thinking about where they live, their zip code. So important in healthcare.
That's a big topic of the conference today, is some of these sort of community factors and public health data. Not so much to say what's your data, but to look at what are the trends that we see on a community basis based on zip code and other things like that, which is really, really powerful. You mentioned number 4, the clinician experience. There was another term that I've heard a couple times today, which is practicing to the top of your license. Describe that for me.
Yeah, so I think, everyone who provides care typically has some type of registered nurse license, medical doctor, and really thinking about how, from my vantage point, technology can help, maybe in the background, help clinicians practice to the top of their license so that they're not having to spend time, for example, as much time documenting. Perhaps they can do it through dictation. Ambient clinical intelligence, is there an ability to bring in sound through microphones and screens into a room to help with what's going on in the environment, both from a patient perspective, but also from a patient caregiver safety perspective. And so really thinking about the way that technology can help our clinicians put them back at the bedside where they're doing, either procedures or discharge teaching, medical chemotherapy patient, really focusing on that patient and what that patient and family needs rather than administrative burdens.
They shouldn't be there just filling in paperwork the entire time.
Right.
They should be doing what they're there to do, which is
Right.
take care of people.
Right.
So when I think of Microsoft, I think of a company that has established itself as being really an ecosystem player. Like one of the many strengths there that, somebody who works in an office, it's like,
Right.
this can become sort of a standard and these things work together and they all go together. I think for a lot of people, maybe Microsoft isn't the first company they think of when it's like, oh, I'm going to talk about healthcare. But of course, we all
Right.
know that Microsoft is deeply involved in that. Tell us, I guess, a little bit about how Microsoft thinks about the healthcare industry, what it's trying to accomplish there.
Sure. So, I've been at Microsoft for almost 10 years, and technology has dramatically changed over the past 10 years. But when I think about, even as a bedside nurse, the technology to me was perhaps the medical device. I actually come from a patient monitoring background, so the actual device that was recording vital signs, et cetera. But really, if you think about what's inside that technology and what's aggregating the data, and today funneling that data into, for example, the EMR, and then what is we have these massive amounts of data now, and so how are we using that to improve patient care, improve our practice, as well as provide that data back to the clinician in a manner they can ingest it so that they can make readily, decisions at the bedside, whether that's through prediction or whether that's just retrospective. We like to think we're being more proactive. So with Microsoft, we really have focused on 3 areas within healthcare. We're a big tech company. We're not a health IT company, and I always try and really make that distinction. And we partner with so many different health IT companies that really take the solution the full mile. So if you think about it, I'm just going to make an analogy. Like I tell people, we are the circulatory system, we are the skeleton, we are the infrastructure. Whereas we partner, for example, with Teladoc today. We talk with them, and they really bring it all together in a seamless manner that's presentable, to the end user. So we're on the insides, and you don't hear a lot about what we do, but back to the 3 areas, it's really thinking about cloud computing, so Azure, Dynamics, which is really around, customer relationship management, and you think, well, why would we need that for healthcare? And you do. You need that, especially as we think about the patient experience and preferences, for example. And then the third piece really is around communication and collaboration. So, for example, Teams. And so those are the 3 components at Microsoft that we've brought together in the Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare that has specific features that are important to the healthcare industry. So, for example, and this goes across all Microsoft, but trust, security, compliance, privacy, really important in healthcare, as well as FHIR standards, APIs, HL7, and making data interoperable so that you don't have information in silos. And ultimately, you want that, as I mentioned, you want that data to be interoperable so that you can present it in a way that that clinician can make decisions, or the patient can make decisions about their own health.
Yeah, so it's available and understandable. You talked about sort of the communication aspect
Right.
of understanding what we have there, and I analogize it back to the world that I work in, which is medical devices, and usability is a
Right.
gigantic thing,
Right.
and FDA will say, well, is it usable? And the company goes, yeah, it's usable. And it's like, well, is it really usable? And of course, we're all familiar with Microsoft products, and that's a part, I think, of the company's nature. You mentioned interoperability too, though, and to me that brings up a whole, in my world, this niche of, you go out and you say, I've got a device here, and this device is interoperable with these other ones, and the FDA goes, really?
Right.
But tell us, from the standpoint of interoperability, it's no small challenge, but how do you approach interoperability?
Right.
How do you think about that? The bigger your domain, we were talking today about community health and population health, and it's one thing to have like one doctor or one healthcare system or whatever else, but now you start to expand that out. How do you think about interoperability?
So I'm going to give two answers to your question. So keep me on track. The first part is just how I've seen technology evolve. So I transitioned from clinical practice into medical device. So I started when you would have a medical device at the bedside. You would, for example, it may be a diagnostic device or a screening device. You test the patient. Even patient monitors, you'd print out the result and you tape it in the chart. That's where I started. And so over time, obviously, we've become a much more connected system within the hospital I'm talking about right now. And so the interop really comes into play when you walk into, for example, an intensive care unit, like into a room, and you see 12 different devices, and ensuring that data is all funneling into, for example, the electronic medical record, just from a record to have that record, but then also, as I mentioned before, thinking about aggregating it so that the clinician can make a decision and have that data in front of them in a, like I said, ingestible manner. So that's one piece. The second piece about interop is, I would say more so today, not as a caregiver in the hospital, but like as a consumer. If you think about it, I always like to give the analogy of cashing a check or my bank. I can get a check from anyone, anywhere in the world, or I could even have it transferred electronically to my bank. And it doesn't matter what that person's bank is, where it comes from. I mean, it does matter, but it could
even be a different currency, though.
Right.
Yeah.
And it can be routed into your bank, and you know that it's done securely. I can pull it up on my app, and I can look at it. Whereas with patient records, the challenge from a consumer perspective is, I might have a primary care physician, I might have gone to an urgent care, I might have an MRI done every year at an outpatient clinic, and so I have data in multiple different areas. So as the consumer and being in healthcare, it's incumbent upon me to, I know where each portal that I have, for example, ideally, I would love to see it come in and funnel in, for example, like financial data into one space so I can see it all collectively. And honestly, as a caregiver or a clinician, I want that too, because I want the complete picture, especially now that we're thinking about patient-generated data, and that's a whole other episode. So I don't want to go there today.
Yeah, fair
but,
enough.
I am very into data. I actually wear 2 different devices. But just the massive amounts of data today, I think that's kind of the next frontier, and how we utilize that for the greater good.
It's funny how one little paradigm can sort of switch your mind. And when you said the financial industry or banking,
Right.
as I think I alluded to earlier, I hear people talk about data portability, and they're like, well, you need a briefcase that you could take your data from one institution to another. And okay, fine, I'm listening. But when you said bank, it's like, wow, that actually is probably it's the first time I've heard it, actually. It's probably a better analogy for the kind of thing that we're trying to do. And in an industry that they have succeeded at making it that transparent. So possibly a much, much better model there.
Yeah, and it's comparable if you think about it, because money and health and wealth, I mean, those are probably 2 of the most important things to a person. And so I would love to, as I push forward within the health and the IT industry to see that come into fruition. I personally, I want all my data in one place.
Yeah, oh, very much. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Molly, we're so excited to have you here today, here in Detroit and here at the MedHealth Summit, and talking to us now. Any thoughts you want to leave us with as we go?
No, I think that I was reading earlier today, and I'm sure listeners have heard this, but, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. And I think, while the healthcare system, both providers, payers, life sciences, med devices, I think the cross-pollination that we're seeing and the disruption, even from retail, we do a lot of work with, for example, CVS Health. It's going to be, and it is a really good thing, not only for our clinicians, but for our consumers. And for me, that's why I get up every day, because at the end of the day, I want to know that the clinicians have access to information that can help them do a better job. And as well as patients, I want to ensure that they know what's going on with themselves and their families.
Yeah, well, it does seem very much like we're living in a time right now where a lot of things have changed over the last few years, and there's really some opportunities that are really cool because people have woken up and are paying attention to a lot of things now.
Right. Well, thank
Molly
you.
McCarthy, Microsoft, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
Well, we're thankful to Molly for that interview, and also thankful to MedHealth. This brings to the conclusion our series of interviews that were conducted at the MedHealth Summit on November 1st. And if you look at the screen there, you can see that we did those interviews. We brought the studio, but we did those in conjunction with the Meeting of the Minds podcast. Chris Hemphill there in the studio doing some interviews that you can also see if you go to medhealthinnovation.org. That's medhealthinnovation.org/summit. The November 1st, 2022 Ford Field MedHealth Summit is there. And this was also with the Meeting of the Minds podcast and with Healthcare Now Radio. So we had a great time. There's more interviews to see there conducted by Chris as well. And Meeting of the Minds is doing great stuff as well. Well, guess what, folks? That brings 2022 to a close. It's good to have been with you this year. We look forward to 2023. The next 2 weeks, there will be no shows as we enjoy our family and friends. But January 6th, we will be back with you with all new programming. We've also got some interviews to show you from the Medica trade show in Dusseldorf, Germany. You're going to hear all about the European market there. We'll be enjoying bringing those to you in January, as well as all new programming for 2023. Thanks for being with us today.